given that you were given a public forum or something, right? Same with libel. You can't just like start spouting off, like you can't just like start saying stuff that
But that's civil law, that's not criminal law. Like slander and
No,
libel,
you
that's...
say, I can cure cancer, you honestly believe that you can cure
But that's
cancer.
not slander or libel.
That's false advertising.
No. If I say like,
Maybe I missed the point, sorry.
it is criminal, I believe, if I say things like, Ian has been guilty of poisoning people in the past. Like he has a history of poisoning people. Like this is on record. That's something that's just not true. Even if I believe it's true, I'm causing him public damage.
We're sort of veering off a little because we're now talking about libel and slander law, which are not covered under freedom of speech, but criminal offenses, and they have their own statutes.
But the reason why I'm making the point is to not distract ourselves
Yeah.
by talking about libel, slander, and like misinformation in like advertising as somehow like relevant to the topic of hate speech.
Okay.
The example I'm thinking of is in the situation of Muslim political leaders or religious leaders, let's say for their own gain, in order, wanting to incite hate on certain groups. They continue the myth that Jews sacrifice Christian children to include blood in the Passover matzah, that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So they want to. They.
You can taste the piety.
That's hateful speech.
Yes.
But the people who might go and then discriminate against their Jewish neighbours or whatever, they may honestly believe that.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't matter.
Legally speaking, that's immaterial. Where you got the information is immaterial because the expression of that opinion falls under the category of hate speech because it is intended to incite hatred against, or it has the effect of inciting hatred against a particular group. So I understand the point that you're making, but it's sort of tangential to the question of whether or not we should have hate speech laws. Because hate speech laws don't enter in, that's one of the places where they're very clear. Specific incitement of hatred is illegal under the laws. The question is more largely, should we have those laws at all? Now, to extrapolate a point within that topic is, do hate speech laws punish those who do not intend or have there is no intention to incite hatred? It is pure ignorance on their part. Yeah. Would they be punished unfairly, unjustly, where education would instead remediate?
Let's go to the person who's informed by the political or religious leader, and they say, "Oh, such and such said whatever," and they tell everyone else.
Yeah. Right.
Would they be charged? Could they be charged with hate speech?
Yes, they could.
Even though they're ignorant.
Yes.
What about the situation where, like Fred Phelps, they are legitimately concerned for the lives of Christian children at Passover?
No, in Canada that would definitely be hate speech. But Canada and the United States have different laws. So.
Yeah, in the States that probably wouldn't qualify.
Well, they don't have hate speech laws in the States.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It doesn't matter whether people intended or whether they know, because I'm an abortion rights activist. I've been dealing with this for many years, and the anti-abortion people are well known for spreading all kinds of misinformation and lies. Well, I shouldn't say lies, because it doesn't matter how many times you correct them or show them the evidence, it doesn't matter. They just keep on saying it and saying it. So I don't know whether they are lying or whether they really believe it. It doesn't matter. I mean,
they're trying to win.
It's the effect is what's important. I just wanted to mention something like in defense of hate speech laws. And you mentioned Dr. Tiller earlier. I was a friend of Dr. Tiller's. It was very, very upsetting when he was assassinated. And in terms of, I mean, sure, his killer was caught and justice was done there, but it just enrages me that Bill O'Reilly was never investigated or arrested. And justice is not done. He got away with it. He incited that. So there should be something to, it just drives me crazy.
And again, that would, the law under which he would be prosecuted, should have been prosecuted, was incitement of violence. The expression of the opinion did have the effect, but let's say, just for this, I'm in no way trying to minimize the tragedy or the very clear culpability of many members of the media, specifically Bill O'Reilly. I'm not trying to minimize that at all, but if we could imagine a situation in which I went to Speaker's Corner in Toronto, or just gave a speech in general, from an Afrocentric perspective, and I was talking about the, people, that humanity has African origin, and there is some merit. My intention is to say, black pride, just be proud of who you are, kind of thing. Some other fringe group takes that and turns that into a black supremacist doctrine, which they teach based on my instruction. And then some other fringe group, and this is not a hypothetical, this happens all the time. Blood and Power is a really, really, really good example of this. They take these people who make a legitimate point, misconstrue the point, and then there are members of the Blood and Honor group who go out and commit acts of violence based on the teachings that they get that are based on other teachings that are misconstrued.
Deliberately misconstrued.
Not deliberately misconstrued. They're not deliberately misconstrued.
But the people who listen to like person X say something and turn it into something completely different.
I can watch Requiem for a Dream, and Ethan can watch Requiem. We can be in the same room, watch the same movie, and get two very, very, very different interpretations of it.
No doubt.
And they are both equally legitimate. Now, he may get the full idea that drugs have a really negative effect on people. My thing could be, drugs are okay as long as you don't let them take over your life. And then I go and teach a group of kids, kids, just be safe when you use drugs. The drugs are okay to use. And then one of my students dies of an overdose. I'm not deliberately misconstruing. I'm just playing out one interpretation of something that I heard. Now, I may not get the correct interpretation.
Sure, but it depends how far you go from the original, isn't it?
But it doesn't
or
have
you go, it's not even reasonable to derive this from.
We're not talking about a case where I watch the movie, and then go out and tell kids to overdose. That's bizarre. That kind of situation is very rare. But to hear it second and third hand and have the skew get more and more and more and more skewed based originally on legitimate information. And that happens all the time. So the creationists, for example, another good example, where they take isolated scientific findings and they say, look, this supports even though it doesn't. And it's not a deliberate misconstrual. It's
a deliberate misconstrual if you pick and choose things that only support your theory. That is deliberate. All I'm saying is
everyone does that though. That's really, really difficult.
All I'm saying is, of course, there's interpretation comes into this, etc. But leaders of political movements do it all the time, where they deliberately reformulate whatever somebody said or the facts or whatever in order to make their point or whatever they want to happen or to influence people in a certain way. And they do it deliberately all the time. Whether or not it's saying that, all Christians are this or that, or atheists are this or that, it's deliberate. Right from
but
the
yeah, you can have
the you were making is for the cases where it's not that, right?
I believe there is deliberate misinterpretations, but when we're addressing the hypothetical non-deliberate ones, it's finding out how much.
Well, I'm just saying with respect to how the laws are applied. Somebody's, I can shoot you and I can shoot him, but but the police are going to charge me based on the circumstances surrounding that, right? Whether or not it was in self-defense and etc. And if you, legitimately were misinformed, really thought that, you were disseminating the facts, I would tend to think either the jury, the judge, the police, etc. would be less likely to charge you under those circumstances.
Plus, if you shoot me,
I would hope anyway.
You shoot me and you shoot Ethan. When you shoot me, you get suspected of a hate crime, which is a whole separate thing. But anyway, Matt?
So I think it might be helpful to look at why, or what the features of the Bill O'Reilly case were with respect to like Dr. Tiller and the application of hate speech laws in Canada in concrete. Like with respect to like Bill O'Reilly's case, so I think there is something to be said about his participating in an incitement to violence, which is different from hate speech, and that's important because we're talking about the hate speech laws. And I think like the fact that, for example, he made his comments in a context, in an American context, like Rachel Maddow, right, had that segment where she lays out the context of the United States, where they actually have a history of targeting specific abortion care providers, right, or like reproductive health care providers, and like putting their information on like pamphlets and like putting them up. And Bill O'Reilly knows this, and he's buying into it and like lending his voice to it because it gets him viewers, right? So he's culpable under that, like, under the fact that he specifically targeted one person as opposed to saying like abortion is a problem in America or something.
Let me do something that I never thought I would do in a billion years, to defend Bill O'Reilly for a moment. Hypothetically speaking, if I was his lawyer, what I would come back to is that Bill O'Reilly has an audience of 7 million people. Roughly, that's an okay estimate that his audience is 7 million. How many people went out and murdered an abortion doctor? One.
Okay.
So to say that it's a specific incitement to violence.
I know,
the vast majority of people knew that he was speaking.
But what I want to say is that
one nutcase.
I understand. I agree.
That's all it takes.
But what I'm saying is there is an argument to be made on those grounds in the Bill O'Reilly case. I'm not saying it would be successful. I'm not making that argument myself. I'm just saying that these are the considerations to make in the Bill O'Reilly case, whereas in Canada, the application of hate speech laws is much more deleterious to free speech than stopping people like Bill O'Reilly.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily true.
But the example that I want to give is what's the guy's name, the editor of Maclean's, who was sent to the Human Rights Court in Canada for writing
Ezra Levant?
Yes. So that's what hate speech laws look like in Canada, right? Is Ezra Levant's prosecution.
Well, what did he do? What was his case?
So Ezra Levant wrote some editorials, 2 editorials in the Maclean's, talking about how Islam is a threat to democracy in Canada. And he was making a philosophical critique, I think. He is also a right-wing person who I don't like personally, but
like person.
What's that?
Like person.
Yeah, right-wing-esque. No, he's a jerk.
That's human-like.
I mean, this part of the problem with defending freedom of speech is you're always forced to do it in the context of the biggest assholes who you're defending. And this is a point where a colleague of Richard or Christopher Hitchens was saying the Muhammad cartoons that we're defending, or Terry Jones that we're defending, or if we're defending freedom of speech, or Ezra Levant. All these guys are assholes. The cartoons were really they weren't good political cartoons. They were really poorly drawn. They weren't making any point. But we have to defend them now passionately because it's freedom of speech. But Ezra Levant was making a political philosophical point, and he was sent to the Human Rights Court in Canada under the hate speech laws.
I convicted.
He wasn't.
Yeah.
I think
getting sent to the court doesn't necessarily mean.
I understand, but those are
Speech law, or was it the Human Rights Codes?
It was for the content of his speech. The reason that he was in the court was for the content of his editorials.
But I just don't believe people have a right not to be offended. And I don't believe that hate in and of itself is something that we want to silence. It seems to me that the problem is violence and actual breaches of the peace.
I'm going to come back to that.
Yeah.
I'm going to take your comment